It's just we against them. It's always about we against them.
That this accent or that this way of thinking is the cultivate one. If there is one which is cultivated, this is because there is another one which is not.
Class and racial inequalities are intimately interwoven, formal education playing no small role in its reproduction. Here we provide a glimpse into some of the Global South's key educational thinkers, instrumental in the dissection of the implicit tools wielded to maintain socioeconomic and cultural hierarchies.
Education is fundamentally contradictory. It has the ability to bring out the least determined aspects of people as well as program and determine them. Vieira's fundamental thesis is drawn from this, as he believes that there is no impartial education. A lot of his research indicates that education's main goals are either domestication or liberty. This consequently leads to it being political. As a result, Vieira's key educational dilemma is: how can oppressed people contribute in constructing the pedagogy of their liberation as fragmented, unauthentic beings? He calls into question the politics of educational practice, a topic that language all too often dismisses. Neither the educators nor the educatees' reality perspectives are taken for granted in Vieira's approach. He subjects both to conversation in order to be problematized. His work is distinguished by its focus on the use of power, influence, and reputation in educational activities. Vieira openly emphasizes the concepts of emancipation and humanization as they are the main goals of his approach. He links this to the desire to influence, as he believes that this is the driving force for educational activity. Educators have taken on the task of persuading others that they bear the responsibility for education. Vieira accentuates how he describes the mechanical defect in the current system in his essay, The Banking Concept of Education. Within his writing, he offers a solution that he says medicates the learning-teaching imbalance in the classroom. According to Vieira, the faulty perception is teachers' oppressive depositing of material into their students. The banking concept, as defined by Vieira, is simply an act that stifles student intellectual growth by turning them into comatose receptors and collectors of information and material. To counteract the dehumanization brought by the banking paradigm, Vieira advocates problem-posing education. Both students and teachers' responsibility become less organized in this approach, and both engage in acts of enriching dialogue to effectively assert and gain knowledge from one another.
Ngugi wa Thiong'o argues that racial and class inequalities of colonial consequence are reproduced through the tool of language. Ngugi grew up hearing and learning stories in his mother tongue Gaiku about animals who symbolized the underdogs, but would eventually become the heroes. Animals like the ones on the covers of his novels. Ngugi would later realize these stories passed down through generations reflected the harsh and unfair world in which he lived. He described the English language as the official vehicle and the magic formula to colonial elitism, and as an implicit tool used to maintain colonial rule in contemporary education. His book Decolonizing the Mind presents language as imperative to the human identity. Therefore, when he entered primary education at a colonial school where his mother tongue was literally beaten out of him, he lost a part of his identity, a part of himself. However, Ngugi dedicated much of life to returning to familial roots and eventually gave up writing in English. He worked hard to unlearn the propaganda attached to the English language and instead embraced the joy and what he described as the music of our language.
Rabindranath Tagore, a Bengali Renaissance polymath, had a vision of education which comprised liberatory education for creativity, connection and freedom. He developed his own educational theory, which has been used to guide the provision of holistic education with emphasis on the social, intellectual, spiritual and physical components of humanity. Tagore's teachings postulate that a nation's curriculum must equally prioritize a student's mental and physical development and associate the environment with an educational context. He focused on ontology, with the overarching themes of his work comprising naturalism, humanism, internationalism and idealism. This is significant because education does not only occur within a school setting nor with only one knowledgeable other, but it exists within and is mediated through social movements, communities, homes and virtual spaces, so every element needs emphasis. Tagore echoed this through his own schools in Santinetkan, when lessons are taught in nature and in the shade of the trees instead of, quote, prison-like classrooms, unquote. Tagore was very vocal about his distaste for colonial schools for enforcing a pedagogy unrelated to students' regional, historical and lingual context. A consequence of this being the propagation of mechanical role learning as opposed to genuine comprehension and the practice of rural skills. Tagore's use of stories such as Parrot's Training and Two Birds serves as satire and caricatures colonial education with the noble purpose of emphasizing how didactic teaching stifles a child's creativity and restricts freedom. Tagore's aim for education was to inculcate the spirit of sympathy, service and self-sacrifice in the individual so that they could expand their love far and wide across all barriers of caste and colour. Supplementing this with utilitarian ideals means students can be self-serving to provide for themselves and their nation, as well as be in harmony with all existence. It would also create a well-balanced and meaningful learning experience as opposed to instructional and lifeless learning, as a mind or logic is like a knife or blade. It makes the hand bleed that uses it.
Lastly, I will be talking about Ambedkar, who was born into the lowest Hindu caste system, the untouchables, and thus experienced first-hand impacts of being born into a lower caste. This system reproduced class inequality, which was mainly shown through a denial of educational and socio-economic rights for lower castes. This meant that students of each caste were only taught skills and jobs that the caste were assigned to, not based on ability. For example, the skills taught to Vaishyas were for jobs such as merchants, farmers and traders. As this was built into the educational system, Ambedkar believed people suffered from a lack of consciousness that there were numerous possibilities outside of their caste-assigned jobs. Therefore, taking the untouchables as an example, they received poor quality education as they were being prepared for jobs that required very little skills. This provided them with little money and thus falling back into the poverty trap, creating a vicious cycle. Therefore, not only did it trap workers into a system of hierarchy and inequality, but also created a division between them. However, Ambedkar really emphasized secular education to come up with solutions to break this cycle, which he portrayed in his famous work, The Annihilation of Caste. He believed in values of rationality and objectivity rather than religion. His objective was to build a value-based society rather than a birth-based society. He believed that higher education should be used to regain consciousness of the untouchables and the lower caste systems, making them aware of their lack of freedom and to help them become aware of their rights and allowing them to break out of the cycle of suffering.
While it's tempting to lean into distributive paradigms, fixating on status and the material distribution of wealth, income and resources, it can obscure the institutional context and social structures within which these racial and class inequalities are upheld. Perhaps we should question the workings of power and interests that create and reproduce these injustices. Only then can meaningful change occur through epistemological plurality, institutional restructuring, and education as a practice of freedom. In essence, to guarantee the best chance of success, all of these key thinkers, critiques and approaches to reformation, from Ngugi to Ambedkar, must work in tandem to address the cumulative demands of a system in crisis. With full acceptance of our collective biography, recognizing that we are all differently marked by historical processes, and by purposefully rejecting assimilative, class and colorblind orientations to education, we mustn't lose the shared conviction that reformed formal education possesses the possibility to possibly deliver an anti-classist, anti-racist future. We share the sentiments of Kundani, a political writer on racial capitalism, who I think really frames how the thinkers we discussed today were treated in their lifetime. In that some of the proposals put forward may seem radical, but radicalization, in the truest sense of the word, is the solution, not the problem.
It is necessary, in being a democratic, tolerant teacher, it is necessary to explicitly, to make clear to the kids or to the adults that their way of speaking is as beautiful as our way of speaking.